Well, the rumored direct came and went, and as it turns out, it was a partner showcase. So rather than giving us any first-party Nintendo titles, such as a new Fire Emblem, we got a bunch of third-party games. A lot of the announcements were exciting. I'm particularly stoked for Octopath Zero and the Elliot game, but Final Fantasy Tactics is also getting a remake. But despite these exciting announcements, I'm sure plenty of people are disappointed they're gonna have to wait even longer before we get any news of a new Fire Emblem. But I've got good news. There are 16 brand new Fire Emblems you can play while you're waiting right now. You see, recently the Fire Emblem Universe Forum, or FEU for short, finished its 3rd annual ROM hacking competition, the Supremely Intellectual Games Utilizing Real Design, or SIGURD for short. This contest tasked participants with making a 1-chapter-long ROM hack, and from limitation breeds creativity, as many ideas that might be a little bit too unbalanced for a full campaign can get explored in depth in a singular chapter. This year's entries featured everything from an Ace Attorney-style courtroom to a necromancer who can revive enemies onto your team, or an arcade-style score attack game. While there are certainly some hacks that I liked more than others, I think everything created for the SIGURD contest had some spark of creativity in it that is worth exploring. So this video is going to serve as 16 mini-reviews stitched together, giving you the elevator pitch for every chapter that I played. If you're interested in playing any of these for yourself, there are links below in the description. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Alright, let's dive in. Avatar Ace Attorney is, as you've probably guessed, a crossover between FE and Ace Attorney, and is a pretty big demonstration of just how far ROM hacking has come in the past decade. It has a courtroom simulator built entirely on top of the Sacred Stones engine. You walk around, listen to statements from the witnesses, and use the signature press and present actions on them in order to prove your client innocent. Although if you use the wrong piece of evidence, you will take a penalty and potentially lose the case. If you've played an Ace Attorney game, it's pretty standard fare, although since it's set in a Fire Emblem world, the puzzles assume some amount of FE knowledge. You don't need to know arcane trivia like Arden's resistance growth, but you should be vaguely familiar with how things work in the Sacred Stones. That way you can prove that your client, a former brigand, did not in fact one-round the Pegasus Knight, who is this trial's murder victim. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of the puzzles, although part of me thinks that I'm just not the target audience. Ace Attorney can be a little bit finicky with just how exact you need to be in your answers, and this very much captures that. So if you're a fan of everybody's favorite gay courtroom simulator, I would definitely recommend giving this one a try. And even if you don't want to play through the entire trial, if you're interested in how a non-traditional hack might look, this is a brilliant and impressive example. As you might expect, Fire Emblem: A Star Wars Story is also a crossover between Fire Emblem and Star Wars. It's a story that takes place during the Clone Wars, where you control a Jedi, his Padawan, and a legion of clone troopers on the quest to kill a Sith Lord in order to recover the Fire Emblem, an ancient artifact that will hopefully let them locate who the secret traitor on the Jedi Council is. Spoilers, it's Palpatine. Mechanically, a lot of stuff just translates very well from Star Wars to Fire Emblem. Your two Jedi use lightsabers and function kind of like swordmasters, being fast and frail sword users, but whenever they have their lightsabers equipped, they are fully immune to blaster damage, since they're reflecting the blaster shots away from each other. You might think that this would make them overpowered, but because they are so frail, they are kind of helpless against the other melee units. So a lot of the game revolves around using your clone troopers to outrange the melee units in order to clear a path for your Jedi, who can more easily take on the blaster foes. The blasters themselves come in a bunch of different varieties. There's the default ones, which are 3 to 4 range, and then you have snipers that are even longer range, and miniguns, which are locked to close quarters, but strong, brave, and bolster your speed, so you will likely quad. You also have a medic, who is basically just the healer, and an engineer, who can apply Medigel, which is kind of a barrier, and use a jetpack, which is functionally the warp staff. The most iconic part of the Star Wars universe, the Force, is also represented here, through Force Veins, which are mechanically identical to Dragon Veins. Your Force users meditate on them, and they give you a variety of strong beneficial effects, oftentimes terraforming the Earth to give you a better shortcut to your objective. All in all, I found the chapter to be short, snappy, and fun, and there's even some variety if you want to do replayability, since you can choose to have the Padawan specialize in Force Speed to get Canto and extra movement, Force Push to get a ranged attack and the ability to shove, or practice her lightsaber in order to get a crit bonus, which is definitely the weakest of them, but I guess you could functionally look at it as a hard mode. That's the cope the Charmander gamers use, right? I swear, not all of these games are crossovers, just the first two that I played happened to be. The next one, Last Refuge, however, is a completely original work. The premise is that it takes place during the final chapter of a full Fire Emblem game, and you have the team that the Lord has recruited throughout his journey. The main character, alongside his Christmas Cavaliers, a bandit working towards redemption, a power-leveled early Pegasus, a late-joining Dark Mage, you got the whole shebang. The map opens with a cutscene explaining the situation that the world is in, and then everyone has their final chapter quote. Just from that short introduction, I found myself getting attached to these characters, and I think that that is a huge strength of the writing. As for the gameplay, it feels appropriately climactic for a final map, with the advantage that the designer knows exactly how strong the units you're facing off are going to be. Although it looks like whoever was playing the save file before me was a bit of a hoarder, because I've got full durability legendary weapons and the rescue staff, a whole bunch of powerful tools. So the map should be a cakewalk, except for the fact that the only character who can damage the final boss is the game's completely untrained Est. So now you've got to squeeze out opportunities to train up this underleveled mage, while also contending with enemies that have powerful tools of their own, including several Deadlord sub-boss characters who will come at you in a staggered fashion throughout the map. If you're not fast enough in dispatching them, you'll get teamed up on by multiple powerful foes. But if you only use your strongest units for the combat, then the Est won't get enough EXP. So it becomes a bit of a balancing act, where you want to keep this fragile mage safe, while simultaneously feeding her as many murders as you can afford to. She has Gale Force, and you have a Dancer, so there are ample opportunities to train her up, and if you're a fan of Nino, then this hack seems like it is tailor-made for you. But even me, a stone-cold FE7 hater, found myself smiling the whole time as I stomped through this tower of monsters in order to train up a super child. The world itself also feels really fleshed out and well realized. Like, we've got the final chapter quotes, the Deadlords, the relationships between the different characters, and certain blue units will even have boss dialogue against specific Deadlords, indicating that they had a relationship earlier in the story that we just didn't get to see because we were plopped down in the ending. It's a really cool feeling. I really liked this one. No Grave Unturned is a very mechanically interesting Fire Emblem chapter. Instead of having a traditional healer, the main character is able to revive allies, and depending on the mode, even enemies from the dead, in order to continue the fight past the grave. As such, it makes sense that your mission is to storm a graveyard, grab a corpse, and then escape with it. Although, instead of carrying it, you controlled it like another unit because, yep, the main character revived them as well. This on its own makes for a really cool heist-like feeling, But in my opinion, the coolest part of No Grave Unturned has nothing to do with the necromancy and everything to do with the new accuracy system. You see, in this game, attacks never miss. Instead, you either deal a traditional blow or a glancing blow. This is sometimes described as heads-tails, where heads is the more beneficial hit and tails is the glancing blow. Glancing blows deal less damage, and oftentimes there is also a beneficial effect that only applies if you roll heads. For example, Thunder applies a new status to the enemy, but only on heads, not on glancing blows. This means that no matter what, when you're attacking, you're always going to deal some damage, so you don't get the feel-bad moments of not making any progress whatsoever because you got unlucky. And because of this, hit rates can be universally much lower, since even a miss makes some amount of progress. But all of this is tied into the SP system, which helps you supplement your hit rates. Your SP starts at 0, but it can go up as high as 20 or down as low as -20. And the SP adds to your hit rates, meaning that as you get more SP, you get more accurate, and as you get less SP, you get less accurate. It's kind of like if Biorhythm didn't suck ass. Because the way that you gain SP is by doing beneficial actions, such as attacking from weapon triangle advantage, dealing more damage than the enemy dealt to you, or killing a foe. Meanwhile, you lose SP if you get attacked at disadvantage or if the enemy deals more damage to you, and not only that, but you lose SP at the start of every turn. So you naturally are funneled away from turtling since you always want to be aggressive to gain SP in order to get better hit rates. SP is also the resource that the main character uses in order to revive the dead, so you make the trade-off of lowering their accuracy just to bring back a comrade to have another body to throw in the meat grinder. Seriously cool stuff, and I would love to see this accuracy system brought into a longer campaign than just a single chapter. The Wood Wars is a more untraditional hack. It is a PvP-focused experience, although if you want to, you can play against the AI, but I think it's more fun with another human behind the wheel. The green team and purple team both have the same units, and the board is completely symmetrical, with treasure chests in the two unoccupied corners and a ballista on the central island. Each of the treasure chests give you power-ups, which is a held item that boosts your stats if it's in your inventory. And the ballista has 5 durability and incredibly long range, while also being mobile.
Crashing the mobile artillery into a house!
Because of the existence of these side objectives, you are discouraged from doing the end turn strategy that Fire Emblem PvP often devolves into, since it can be a great boon to capture the ballista and suddenly threaten a large portion of the map to kill the weak enemy lord. Additionally, you've got some pretty strong tools like Rescue or Nosferatu, but each of these only has 1 durability, and once they break, your character will have to use only their basic weapons. So deciding the right time to deploy these powerful tools can be the make or break difference between victory and defeat. The Wood Wars also flavors itself as more of a monster mash, with all of the classes being reflavored to be some manner of creature. Instead of Pegasus Knights, your flyers are Chimera. Instead of a traditional dancer, you have a Gorgon who plays a tune. The mages are skeletons, the armor knights are phantoms, and the cavalry units are riding spiders instead of horses. Although, on the topic of the cavalry, I will say they feel a bit overpowered. They have larger movement than anyone else, and unlike the flyers, they don't have an innate weakness, because while the lord does have effective damage with the rapier, they're at weapon triangle disadvantage, and the lord is your game over condition, so you kinda wanna keep him away from the front lines whenever possible. Player 1 also felt like they had a pretty distinct advantage since they got to move first with nothing to sort of balance that out for player 2. There's also a glitch where player 2 will drop items if player 1 kills their thieves, and I know that's not intentional, but it was definitely a little annoying to have to be like, okay, now you gotta throw that away because you're not supposed to have that. Still, I had a blast playing this on stream with Stagurna, and I would definitely recommend checking it out if you have another friend who's into Fire Emblem. I also think it would be cool to see more maps around this premise, potentially with different player unit makeups. The Rider's Trial is a fully functional single-chapter hack, but it's also meant to be the prologue for a longer multi-chapter hack that is currently in progress. So if you like what you see, then it's definitely a project to keep an eye on. The core gimmick is that all playable characters are mounted units. So you have increased movement, as well as the ability to rescue drop and canto, but the enemy tends to be tougher than you, so you're going to want to take advantage of advanced tactics in order to outmaneuver them and emerge victorious. The chapter itself is also on a turn timer, further incentivizing you to take advantage of all that extra movement. If, like me, you're a fan of reliability, then this hack has got you covered. Hit rates are universally pretty high, and any crit below 10% is automatically reduced to 0, which functionally means there's actually no crits in this chapter unless you get really lucky on level ups, because no one has the stats to pull them off. Since this is meant to be the introduction to a larger project, there's not too much else going on in the chapter itself, but I can say that it looks absolutely beautiful. The portraits are quite well done, and the new custom battle forecast is very eye-catching because it has sort of glowing font for the damage, hit, and crit rate. The music choices were also really good. I didn't recognize any of the songs, but they are earworms that I will be going to bed thinking of tonight. The Last Stand is another take on the late game map in Isolation, where you are drip-fed hints about the campaign you missed out on. Instead of being a kill boss finale, however, this is an epic survive map. The Lord and his trained-up comrades have a fort all to themselves with 4 narrow choke points that they can take advantage of to funnel enemies into their doom. But despite being on the final map of the game, the Lord appears to be pretty unprepared for conflict, with most units only having basic weapons, and not even any healing items. This is because one of the central gimmicks of the map is Thracia 776's capture system, where you take a hit and damage penalty in order to try to capture the opponent so you can steal their weapons. Through this, you can acquire stuff like hand axes, extra healing items, stat boosters, and even potentially warp, rescue, or berserk staffs. Of course, you are going to be risking things when you go for the capture, so there's a risk-reward element there, but you can at least bolster accuracy through the charm skill or other skills that your units have. In fact, this hack is very skill-heavy. All of your teammates have 4 skills, and oftentimes these skills work together with each other well. For example, your hero has Soul and a skill that increases proc rates if you are below 50% HP, kind of like Wrath and Resolve, but for proc rates instead of raw stats. I know that just made several people in my audience's ears perk up. There is one character who feels a little bit weird. She has a bunch of accuracy boosting skills, but one of those skills is Hawkeye, which means that attacks never miss, so all of her other accuracy boosting skills are pointless, but I think that's just an oversight. She's meant to be super accurate, so like, whatever. It works and it's pretty funny. Overall, I'm probably not the target audience for this since I'm not a huge fan of defend maps, but I think if you do like the defend and survive objective, this is something you might want to check out. It seems pretty cool. The Three Princes feels like what you would get if you combined Fire Emblem with a cooperative dungeon crawler. You control 3 characters, a thief, an armor, and a mage, and they must work together to brave their way through a tower and save the princess. Each of them has their own motivation for being here, which will get fleshed out throughout the course of the story when they activate their support conversations with each other. But they're going to need to work together to make their way through the trials that this tower has before them. And that's because the 3 of them have unique kits that supplement each other. Forrest, the knight, is the most straightforward of the 3 since he just uses the martial weapons to attack his foes. But he really wants to be at weapon triangle advantage, both because this gives him extra bonuses and because killing foes at weapon triangle advantage allows him to take a second action once per turn. Thus, you really want to make sure he has a sword, lance, and axe available. But in order to supply him with these weapons, since enemies don't drop them, you're going to have to utilize Kai, the thief, as he has the ability to initiate a trade with opponents, and that includes being able to trade away equipped items. Now, there's no convoy in the game, so you are still limited to 5 inventory per unit, and thus Kai's pockets can get clogged pretty quickly, but worst case scenario, you can just trade a weapon a foe can't use onto them in order to initiate the bullying protocol. Kai uses both swords and bows to attack, so he even has ranged options available to him. Although Trevor the Mage is almost certainly the better ranged combatant. He's able to use magic either to fight or to heal, and while tomes work basically how you would expect a Fire Emblem tome to, healing is a little bit different. Trevor doesn't use stabs. Instead, he has a skill that allows him to heal himself or his allies as a separate special action. But that action relies on expending charges that are built up every time he secures a kill. So you can't just limit him to the support role. You want your frail mage to go to the front lines and kill people, otherwise he won't be able to heal his allies. Now, you might be worried having a frail unit on the front lines because if he gets killed, it's a game over, right? The 3 of them are all essential to the story, but it actually doesn't work that way. Unlike in most Fire Emblems, people don't die when they're killed here. Instead, if a unit gets knocked to 0 HP, they are downed, and either of their allies can revive them by standing next to them and using the revive action. This brings them back with 10 HP and allows them to continue the fight. And this is one of the main reasons why I compare the title to a co-op adventure. It reminds me of playing Deep Rock Galactic or Left 4 Dead, scrambling to revive my teammates because honestly the squad is incomplete without all 3 members. They're all pretty essential. There's a couple of other cool ideas in there too, like brambles that you can only burn with fire, or a consumable item that you can use to upgrade your weapons to the next tier. And despite my short time with the characters, I found myself feeling emotional at the ending, which, at least to me, is one of the signs of good writing. Cougle opens with a cutscene where a professor is tasked with taking his students to arrest one of the nobles who is accused of conspiring against the reigning power of the land, which draws immediate parallels to the plot of Fire Emblem Three Houses. But as it turns out, the 16th Fire Emblem isn't the work of literature that this game is taking inspiration from. Instead, it is primarily drawing from the tragedy of Johann Faust, a professor who made a deal with the devil that puts a clock on his soul. And that is what the main lord, the professor in question, is dealing with. Every turn he's going to take 3 points of damage, and since he's the game over condition, you want to make sure to keep him topped up, both with your healers and with healing items. Unless you're feeling greedy, because he is decked out with a bunch of skills that get stronger the lower his HP is. So the riskier strategy is to try to take advantage of things like Vengeance procs, that way you can push through the enemy forces before the hard time limit of the professor's HP becomes a problem. The story also has some interesting implications, because you are working to fight against a cult that is trying to revive demons, with the ironic twist being that the leader is himself getting assistance from a demon. Albeit, this story's Faust is definitely a more sympathetic figure than the original Johann Faust, because he turned to a demon to save his students' lives, whereas the initial Faust archetype just turned to a demon for more knowledge. A quest for gold is exactly what it sounds like, a chapter where you're trying to get as much gold as possible. And there are a couple of ways to accomplish this. Every enemy on the map drops some amount of gold, most 250, although some of the tougher ones will drop more than that. Additionally, at the start of every turn, all of your units generate 100 gold passively, incentivizing you to keep the non-game over conditions alive. And there are a plethora of shops where you can either sell your own items for gold or purchase more expensive ones in the hope that they will allow you to fight more enemies, including the incredibly tough boss who drops a white gem. You also have a rogue, so you could steal the white gem if you're incapable of killing the boss, and you can steal some other items from other enemies in order to sell them, like a talisman and a red gem. The last sources of gold are a couple of villages isolated far away from your starting point, and some arenas where you can gamble in order to increase your score. Because while there is a goal for the amount of gold you can get before exiting with one of your lords, the design philosophy behind this game was to make it more of an arcade score attack type deal, where everyone is going to post their high gold counts on the FEU thread. So if that sounds like the sort of thing you're into, then check it out. Pillars of the Horizon opens with a cutscene that immediately makes it clear you are in a bad situation. The approaching enemy forces are overwhelming, and you've been reduced to a skeleton crew, many of which lack combat experience. Gameplay-wise, this translates into your unpromoted scrubs fighting against waves that include many promoted enemies. And your objective is simply to defend a line similar to Conquest Chapter 10 or Radiant Dawn 3.13. Although the absence of a goal number of turns gives you a much more bleak feeling, and honestly, I was convinced that there was no way to win Pillars, and we were just delaying the inevitable. But even if our ragtag crew managed to turn things around, it wouldn't be a happy ending because the foe that's fighting us is led by the main character's daughter. In a story that's revealed in flashbacks interspersed throughout the Defend map, we learn about the tragedy that tore apart the ruling family of this land and put both mother and daughter on opposite sides of a war that neither of them especially wanted. Things just sort of got out of hand accidentally. Honestly, the whole thing is a very well written and presented tragedy, and that extends to the minor characters who actually have different dialogue depending on which ones live and die during the ending cutscene. But on that topic, I should probably talk about how you get to the ending, because as hopeless as the situation seems, there is actually a way for the player to succeed. You need to hold out against increasingly difficult waves of enemies by leveraging powerful tools like a longbow, bolting, brave lance, and even a flying canto dancer in order to both passively hold choke points and aggressively snuff out any dangerous enemies. Because remember, if any of them passes the line you're defending, it is game over. Eventually, in the bottom left portion of the map, a wave of strong promoted units will show up to reinforce you, and this is where you turn the tide and change the map from defend to kill boss. The trouble isn't completely over yet, there is still a game over condition you're defending, and the reinforcements are far enough away from your weak scrubs that you might just get a game over from the Lord dying. But if you can leverage what tools you have and push forward, you can bring this bloody battle to a close. Although, as you might expect, it's still quite the downer ending, no matter what choices you make. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of defend maps, but this one really caught my attention. Perhaps in part because it was inspired by 3.13, one of my favorite maps in the franchise. I really liked the feeling of desperation it conjured, as well as the genuine hope that came from turning the tide with my newfound allies. And, of course, the writing is top tier. The Author's Curse is a troll hack centering around a meta-narrative where the ROM hack's creator is torturing these characters he's put into the hack. I like troll hacks, as you might know from my rebalances, but I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly enthralled with this entry. It felt more like wasting my time than trolling me, as I had to walk around and stand in forests to try to find items, and eventually my units just started randomly dying because the author said so, rather than because of any sort of troll or trap that I fell into. The story itself also made pretty sloppy use out of domestic abuse in order to try to get an emotional reaction, and the gameplay just kind of devolved into a 50-turn long end turn simulator without any enemies that threatened my one game over condition. It is nice to see a modern day troll hack, as they've kind of fallen out of favor in Fire Emblem circles as of late, but alas, I'm not a huge fan of the exact execution of this one. In the Wardens Woes, you play as a jailer trying to stop a chaotic prison break. In fact, it's so chaotic that the game actually begins on enemy phase, with you not getting a blue unit turn until turn 2. Your goal is to stop a bunch of VIPs from escaping for 13 turns. And the way that you accomplish this is by having your warden use his warp staff to send the waves of blue reinforcements into various points in the hall to fight against the red units. There are rogues that have pass and will just focus on unlocking doors, which is how the bosses get out, and there are some red civilians who don't fight you and instead just try to escape but get in your way as you're trying to fight the bosses. As for the bosses and the regular red units, they are constantly trying to escape. If you're in their range, they will fight you, but if they have the choice between escaping on the escape tile or fighting one of the blue units, they will always prioritize escaping on the escape tile. In theory, the goal is to stop any of the VIPs from escaping, but in practice, the game is bugged, so you can't actually accomplish a game over whatsoever. Still, if you want to play this, since it's only a one-chapter hack, you can honor system it, or you can have fun seeing just how many red units escape while you are fighting this chaotic uphill battle. Oden of Aspesides is another preview of an upcoming larger project. This time, an SRPG studio game. And despite SRPG Studio having a reputation for looking kind of ugly and chunky, I think this definitively proves that that comes from the default assets rather than the engine itself. Because before talking about the gameplay, I just want to gush about the visuals. You can see some of the character portraits on screen right now, and they are hand-drawn and lovely, but I also really appreciated the old-school sprites that they had for the grid-based combat. Maybe it's just my nostalgia speaking, but I really prefer sprites over 3D models, especially when the sprites are as good-looking as the ones in Omen. Honestly, highly recommend checking out the demo, if only to appreciate the art style. But there's some good stuff gameplay-wise as well. You only get access to 2 units, but both of them have pretty deep kits, with one being a bodyguard that is able to teleport to the side of the other, and the other one having an ability that not only prevents them from getting critical hit, but also adjacent allies, encouraging you to position in such a way to avoid the killer weapon equivalents by having people next to their walking Hoplon guard. Each character also has activated skills that they can use on player phase that are kind of akin to combat arts from SOV and Three Houses. I guess they would be most parallel to the SOV ones because they cost HP and they have some sort of additional effect. For example, the one that I ended up spamming was using magic power and hitting on a weaker defensive stat as opposed to the stronger one. This very much feels like a demo for a larger project, so there's not too much to chew on as an individual chapter, but Omen definitely got my attention, and I'm going to be looking out for how this project develops in the future. And the last Sigurd game that I played was The Pen, which is set in a world where authors have their creations compete in fights to the death. As such, The Pen is pretty mechanically complex, yet everything is explained to you in such a way that it becomes easy to grasp how the different options work. Each of your 4 units has a past, present, and future form, corresponding to different chapters within their story. The past is a weak unit that has high growths, the present is medium, sort of balanced, and they have 0% growths, and a future unit is incredibly strong and gets access to some extra weapon like a Brave Lance or a Legendary Sword, but they have negative growths. And rather than gaining experience, anytime a unit takes an action, they get a functional level up. So if a trainee unit just does chip or uses a heal staff once, they will get a full level up. Meanwhile, if one of your legendary units uses a staff, they will get a full negative level up. And these level ups retain across all 3 forms. So any level ups that you get as a trainee will bolster your legendary form, but anytime that you do combat as a legendary form, all 3 of your forms get weakened. As such, the goal is to try to funnel experience into the trainee forms, only using the future form when you absolutely need to, and relying on the present form for the heavy combat since you're not going to get penalized since they have 0 growths. However, there is a twist. You have access to a dancer, who is actually your writing assistant, and the writing assistant has some rewrites they want to do. And anytime that they dance for one of your units, those rewrites will take place for 1 turn. So for example, one of your units is an archer who wants to kill a dragon. And in the rewrite, they become friends with the dragon, meaning that they are a wyvern riding bow unit. For the purposes of level ups, these rewrite units are considered the present, so they get the 0 growths treatment. Your goal is to defeat the enemy writer's creations, meaning that with your 4 units, there are 4 bosses that you need to kill. And each of these bosses has a unique twist that encourages you to rush them down first. One of them creates an additional layer of fog every turn, and for every layer of fog, their weapon gets stronger. So you want to kill them in order to restore your vision before things spiral out of hand and they become impossible to take down. But you also want to rush down the doll maker, because every 3 turns, it's going to spawn a powerful doll that chases down your units. And of course, there is a self-assembling robot that will be incredibly threatening once it's complete, but is helpless in the meantime. So you probably want to rush him down too. As for the 4th creation, well, that one's a little bit different, because it is the Avenger. Whenever you kill a boss, the Avenger shows up and can deal effective damage to whatever unit killed that boss. So suddenly, you can't just juggernaut with one of the units who you trained up as a trainee. You want to have everyone be competent. And the Avenger isn't done after just being killed once. You need to kill all the other bosses before the Avenger can finally be fully killed. So in order to take down these 4 bosses, you want to leverage every tool available, including a freeze staff, a pistol that deals true damage, an acid flask that increases damage other weapons deal, a sword that can't be countered, and the ability to summon necromancer zombies. Because this hack is incredibly hard. I played on normal and ended up failing last minute because I made several misplays in a row that snowballed into a disaster. But despite the stress, I was having fun the whole time. This is really such a unique take on the Fire Emblem mechanics that feels both fresh and familiar at the same time, which, at least to me, is the best kind of new Fire Emblem game. Before we go, I do quickly want to shout out the 17th Sigurd entry, Chronicles of Arna. I didn't play it because I was told there is a bug that makes completing it impossible, but it has an interesting concept. Once again, it takes place in the middle of a campaign that you don't get to play the rest of, but unlike the other 2 late game 1 chapter hacks, this one gives you a gigantic roster to choose from, In fact, from what I'm told, there's over 60 units with different skill combinations and stats. I know plenty of Fire Emblem fans consider battle preparations to be the most fun part of the challenge, and if that's you, this sounds like the perfect one-chapter hack to check out, aside from the game-breaking glitch. Still, it is a very cool idea, and that's one of the things that I found most refreshing about the Sigurd contest. Even the entries that I personally wasn't a fan of had some good ideas at their core. And there's going to be different projects that appeal to different people. Everyone has different tastes after all, and that's part of what makes Fire Emblem such a beautiful series, is different games are going to cater to different audiences. So let me know in the comments which of these games sounded most appealing to you, or if you've played some of them, which one you enjoyed the most, and why. I'm always curious to hear what other people see in Fire Emblem games that might not have appealed as much to me. But now's the part of the video where I thank my patrons. So, thank you, Electric Giga, Erica Ford, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Arvis, Crispy Matthews, Floahay, I Like Frittata, Henry Fint, Amy Hazel, Aeneas Costa, Faulty Videos, Lyra, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Just Riley, Anna Cabana, Some Trades, The Daily Fugle, Faye, Magic Bite, Shinthia, Sardonic Muse, Dysike, Chris, Root Beer Pants, Queen Eliza, Aerith Emblem, Controlled Aegis, Roman Chromantic, Knick Knack Hammersmack, Lepton, Cabbage, SUP, Caius Cole, Histiglop, Bree, Punchfighter Champion, Eggman, Maxine the Vampire Queen, Dragmac Lancer, Carrier Has Left, Jill, Angel Napcaceres, Key the Iron Idol, Calamity Callie, Anom Wanderer, A Clever Username of Lies, Saren Gurlixy, Tailored Muffin, Andu, Len, Gameboo, Carosa, Firant, Your Doctor, Frozen Helm, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Reflect, Formless Thing, Dylan Solis, Guiji555, Smaz Ruby, Zycrom, Robin D, Alenby, Hound Dogs, They Thumb, Klon, and especially my Jagans, Thick Molder, Adele, Alexander Roper, Siggy, and Cereal Bowl. Whew, that's a mouthful. If you want to make my patron reads even more exhausting by having your name appear on screen, there is a link down below where you can support me for as little as $3 a month for early access to my videos, polls that influence the channel, and a couple of rewards too spicy to talk about on YouTube. But please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem. Subscribing is free, commenting is free, liking is free, etc., etc. Regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.